So there's a movie called 1917.
Oh boy, here we go.
I think that this is a terrible oner. It's not a oner through the entire film, obviously, but they stitch a lot of things together to make it look like it's a oner. I kind of think that it's mostly dropped on the script side of things. There just isn't enough emotion carrying the oner. There's not enough shot variety that they're able to get with a oner. Like, you're not able to build suspense in the same way with a oner, or you're not able to pace things in a certain way with a oner in the same way that you are with, you know, being able to like cut specifically. And if you have a film that's primarily devoid of dialogue, you kind of can't really engage in the same way, I guess, with a oner as you can with a oner that does have dialogue. I love Roger Deakins. As a cinematographer, I feel like I have to say that. But I don't. I think that his work is handicapped by the fact that he has to do it as a oner. Losing that ability to edit, losing the ability to like move in for a close-up is a major problem.
I love Travis, and we have so much of the same taste. And one thing we do disagree on is I fucking love 1917, and I do.
Get out.
I feel there is more credit to be given to the script than you're giving it. I do feel that there's a culminating character development that happens throughout that, in the way a good poem works, where it is simple and brief but necessary. Every bit of that 2 hour and 1 minute film is necessary. And I'm not saying that from a cinematography standpoint, arguably the greatest cinematographer of all time, Deakins, isn't handicapped by that. I think that's a very valid point. And I'm certain that Sam Mendes, who's one of the best living directors, probably took a lot from the Spielberg way of trying to get multiple shots within a oner. And I think it is effective. I can hear why it could have been more effective without that. I definitely can hear that. I do think the story itself, though, is not hindered, even though it maybe could have been more effective for you. I do think the story itself of those two, and ultimately one, two individuals within a world war going about this death-defying journey to save a small amount of soldiers, only coming to find, that spoilers, that the surviving soldier is going through this treacherous journey and getting to the other side out of a need to get back home. Despite it not being able to sway the war, they saved a certain percentage of people who would have died as casualties of war. And yet, it doesn't change anything. It's still the world war, but individuals within it were able to save themselves and the ones closest to them. To have that be such an intimate portrayal, and in war, I think almost is more effective with less dialogue. I can see why, from an editing standpoint, it may have been more effective to have had more of a Saving Private Ryan type cut. Or even, I'm a huge Terrence Malick fan, The Thin Red Line. There are other techniques that have proved to be very fruitful in war films that cause a very emotional impact that aren't in 1917 because of the structure of the oner. And I get it. I definitely get why that might limit the impact. I don't think the story itself is rendered ineffective, though, because of it. I still am in a solemn state.
I am very biased that the first hour and a half I thought was terrible, and then the final 30 minutes I thought was brilliant. Once it gets to the end, after he's like fallen into the river and then he's going through to the end, I think all of that works very, very effectively as far as pacing. Mm-hmm. I think the rest of it is kind of just mispaced. Mm-hmm. The whole segment where they're going through the German trenches, that kind of just... Mm-hmm. The booby trap scene, I was just like, this seems...
That was more video game-like.
Yeah, and that's it just had this emotional disconnect.
I get that. And
I think that comes down to...
It's pretty early on in the movie.
Yeah, it just, the slickness of how it was produced, I think kind of brought me out to a large degree. Mm-hmm. So maybe I shouldn't say that I hate 1917, I just hate the first hour and a half.
Well, I will say that maybe you don't like the first hour, but to me, the high point artistically, there's two in that film, but the first high point artistically is when they're entering hell and France is on fire, and you have one of the most beautiful scores in the history of cinema, crescendoing with the shadows of this perfectly dressed set, and you see him come. It's after he's knocked out. From that point forward, I think you could argue that it being a oner the whole time is effective, because it kind of is a oner in his life. He is just literally on a dead sprint the rest of the way until he gets to the second high point of the film, to me, which is the lone voice singing in the woods, and that's what brings him home, and that brings me to tears. And knowing that being a oner I also find more effective makes me kind of, I mean, maybe it was a more intellectual idea, right? Maybe it was born out of an intellectual premise. I fucking love Sam Mendes, and I think the story that they wrote, which it's important to remark upon, is a story passed down from his great-grandfather. So, brief aside, the most important thing to take from 1917 is that every individual and every act of goodness matters and ripples in ways we'll never be able to understand. And take the anecdote of 1917. Sam Mendes' grandfather was in that group of people who was saved. So he passed this story down to his grandchild. Without that one soldier saving Sam Mendes' grandfather, and then his grandfather not only imparting that story, but a love of stories and storytelling to him, decades later we were given a generational defining director who has forever altered and bettered the craft of cinema because one soldier saved a small battalion. That is life. And when we can look at it on a scope that long enough, the film is that's just the cherry on top. Because then what does that grandchild go and do? Tell the story of what human bravery in the face of insurmountable odds as one individual can still change things. The movie's proof that philosophy is true. So maybe they intellectualized the approach practically in production. And maybe they should have been like, this should be a oner, this should be a oner, and this should be a oner. And it probably would have been more effective that way. But there are moments in that are so perfect as oners that it kind of lets me go, okay. The hell on earth scene and the song in the woods of the solitary voice could not have been better without it being a oner. But the rest of it, yeah, I definitely can see where you're coming from.
I have nothing more to add about 1917.
Oh, God.
Yeah, no,
I get where you're coming from. I think you make completely valid points.
I did not know that. But, I mean, I knew that Sam Mendes, some of his family had served. I didn't know what relation, but that's actually kind of a fascinating story.
Yeah. We'd have no Sam Mendes if it wasn't for that soldier.
I mean, thank God for that man.